The sight left me stunned. A massive inflatable hot tub complete with champagne glasses, neon floats, and a Bluetooth speaker blasting pop music sat right on my dock like it belonged there. The Karen sisters, my notorious neighbors with their entitled attitudes and constant boundary-breaking behavior, had crossed the line yet again. They lounged in bikinis, sipping wine as if my dock was their personal spa retreat. My dock, the one I spent years repairing after storms and maintaining with my own hands, was now hijacked without permission. My blood boiled. Who just drags a hot tub onto someone else's property and claims it? I wanted to scream, but instead, a darker, sharper idea took shape. If they thought they could treat my space like a playground, then I'd show them just how dangerous entitlement could be. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply waited, watching the bubbles rise in their stolen luxury. And when the moment was right, I walked over calmly, pulled the plug, and gave fate a little push. What happened next left them screaming as their little paradise drifted far away into the open water. They wanted fun, they got it. Just not the way they planned. The Karen sisters were infamous in the neighborhood. They always parked across driveways, blasted music during late hours, and acted like rules never applied to them. I had put up with their nonsense for months, but this hot tub stunt crossed into pure invasion. They dragged it down my dock as if I wasn't even there. Their smug laughter and condescending comments made it worse, like they were daring me to stop them. I held my tongue. I didn't argue. Instead, I watched as they poured champagne and bragged about how they deserved a little luxury. In their eyes, my property was just free real estate, theirs for the taking. But while they celebrated, I noticed the hot tub's power cord trailing neatly to an outlet on the dock. That was my chance. The next day, when the sisters were lounging again, I walked straight to the outlet, yanked the cord free, and began loosening the straps that held the hot tub in place. They shrieked, demanding I stopped, but I only gave them a polite smile. Slowly, the massive tub began drifting, the current pulling it away from the dock. Their voices went from mocking to panicked as they floated farther out. At first they tried to laugh it off, thinking it was a joke, but when the distance grew and the hot tub spun helplessly in the tide, their panic became real. They waved their arms screaming for help, but I simply folded mine and told them the Coast Guard might eventually find them. Eventually, a passing boat rescued them and tugged their tub back to shore. Their humiliation was complete. The neighborhood never stopped laughing about the floating spa sisters. And from that day on, the Karens never touched my dock again. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest revenge. Asterisk, I first noticed something was wrong when I heard the music. It was faint at first, just the thumping bass of a pop song carried across the water. My house sat at the edge of the lake, quiet and peaceful most days, with only the sounds of birds, the occasional boat, and the gentle slap of water against the dock. But that morning, there was no mistaking it. Someone had brought a speaker. I set my coffee mug down and leaned forward to peer out the window, and that's when I saw it. There, in all its ridiculous glory, was an oversized inflatable hot tub sitting directly on my dock. It looked absurd, like some kind of plastic island ballooned to the brim, its edges wobbling with every ripple of the lake. Steam rose lazily into the cool air, and floating around in the foamy bubbles were the last people I wanted to see. The Karen sisters thought they were notorious in the neighborhood. Everyone had a story about them parking their SUV across other people's driveways, cutting in front of lines at the local store, yelling at waiters for the wrong attitude. They thrived on chaos and entitlement, always acting as if the world owed them something. Most people ignored them, but when you lived 2 houses down from their rental property like I did, ignoring them was nearly impossible. I rubbed my temples and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The sisters were sprawled out in bikinis, their sunglasses flashing under the morning sun. Champagne glasses perched dangerously on the edge of the tub. One of them, the older blonde, had her phone held high, clearly recording a video for social media. I could practically hear her nasally voice through the glass. "Hot tub life, baby, lake vibes." The other sister, brunette with a sharper face, was giggling and tossing her hair like they were filming an advertisement for luxury living. Except it wasn't luxury. It was my dock, my property, my sanctuary. I stepped outside, the wooden boards creaking under my feet, and marched toward them. "Excuse me," I called out. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The blonde lowered her phone just enough to glance at me. "Oh hey, neighbor," she said breezily. "We're just enjoying the lake. Isn't it fabulous?" The brunette chimed in. "Yeah, don't worry. We're not hurting anything. It's just a hot tub. We'll be done later. Just a hot tub." As if dragging a giant inflatable contraption onto my dock without asking was no big deal. My jaw tightened. "This is my dock," I said firmly. "You can't just put something like this here." The sisters exchanged a glance. Then the blonde smirked. "Well, technically, it's a public lake, isn't it? We're just sharing the vibes." I felt my blood pressure rising. "The lake is public," I snapped, "but this dock is not. This is private property. Mine. You don't just show up and set up camp." The brunette rolled her eyes. "Ugh, don't be so uptight. It's not like we're bothering you. We're just having a little fun. You should relax more." Relax, that was their answer to everything. Relax. while they trespassed, littered, and acted like spoiled royalty. I clenched my fists, but I forced myself to take a slow breath. Arguing with them would be useless. They thrived on conflict, on dragging people into their drama. If I raised my voice, they'd only get louder, feeding off the attention, so I stepped back. "Enjoy yourselves," I said flatly, turning on my heel. I could hear their mocking laughter as I walked back toward the house. To them, it was a victory, another neighbor too weak to stand up to them. But inside, I wasn't giving up. I was thinking, calculating, because one thing was certain. The hot tub wasn't staying back in the kitchen. I sat at the table and stared out the window again. The scene looked even more ridiculous from a distance. The sisters clinked their glasses together, foam splashing over the edge of the tub and dripping onto the wood. That dock had taken me to Summers to repair after a brutal storm, plank by plank, with my own hands. Every board was nailed down with sweat and patience, and now they were treating it like some tacky pool deck, like their entitlement extended to everything around them. I felt the anger simmering in my chest, but along with it, a spark of something sharper. An idea dot from where I sat. I could see the bright orange extension cord trailing from the hot tub. It ran neatly across the dock and into one of my outdoor outlets. Of course, they had plugged their entire operation into my electricity, probably without even asking themselves if that was wrong. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. But more than that, it gave me the leverage I needed. For the rest of the morning, I let them be. I watched them splash around, take selfies, and call out obnoxious woohoo-s that echoed across the water. But in my mind, a plan was forming. Something that wouldn't just remove them but would humiliate them, because sometimes words weren't enough with people like the Karen sisters. They needed a lesson, and I was going to be the one to teach it. By the time the sun reached its peak in the sky, I had decided I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to act. And when I finally did, it would be a moment they wouldn't forget. The following day dawned crisp and quiet. A thin mist hovered above the lake's surface, giving everything a silver glow. It would have been beautiful if not for the faint reminder of yesterday's intrusion. The faint squeak of rubber and the low hum of a pump. I walked to the window and, sure enough, there it was. The inflatable hot tub still squatting on my dock like an unwelcome guest, bubbling merrily away. The sisters had returned early. I saw them setting down a cooler, spreading towels, and dragging along more bags than anyone needed for an afternoon at the lake. They were settling in as if my dock were their personal vacation resort. My jaw tightened. I had half expected them to be embarrassed after yesterday, to quietly pack up and move on. Instead, they doubled down. I brewed my coffee and carried it out to the porch, careful to keep my face neutral. The blonde one, who I had learned was named Shelley, waved like we were old friends. "Morning, neighbor," she shouted over the music. "Don't worry, we brought snacks today. You're welcome to join. As if that was the issue. I raised my cup slightly in acknowledgement but didn't answer. My silence seemed to amuse them. They laughed and turned back to their chatter, sipping from tall plastic tumblers. I sat down and tried to think. Yesterday I had felt a flash of anger, sharp and hot. Today it was something colder, more patient. I wasn't just going to throw them off. No, I wanted them to feel the sting of their arrogance, to really realize that entitlement has consequences. The key I knew was the hot tub itself. That silly inflatable contraption wasn't just an eyesore, it was their throne, the source of their smugness. They lounged in it like queens, bubbling in luxury that wasn't theirs. If I could take it away, not just unplug it but really take it away, it would do more than make them leave. It would humble them. And humility was something the Karen sisters had probably never experienced in their entire lives. I spent most of the morning pretending to go about my chores, all while studying the hot tub. The extension cord was still plugged firmly into an outlet, running along the dock where anyone could trip over it. The straps securing the tub to the dock posts were cheap, thin nylonese to loosen with a little patience, and the current, though gentle that morning, always picked up by late afternoon. If the tub were freed, it would drift, not violently, not dangerously, but far enough that the sisters would lose control. The thought almost made me smile. Almost by noon, the sisters were fully settled. They blasted music loud enough to rattle the windows, their shrill laughter punctuating every song. I tried reading a book, but their voices carried too clearly. Every other sentence was some brag about their lifestyle, their social following, their deserved relaxation. Listening to them was like being stuck in a never-ending commercial for bad reality TV. At one point, I heard Shelley complaining into her phone, "Yeah, this dock is perfect. Like we didn't even have to pay for a lake house. People are so uptight about ownership. But whatever, if it's here, it's meant to be shared." I gripped the book tighter. So that was their justification. If something existed, it was theirs to take. The sheer arrogance of it set my teeth on edge. By the time the sun began dipping lower in the sky, my decision was final. I couldn't let this continue. And I didn't want another argument, another pointless shouting match where they twisted words and laughed at my frustration. No, I wanted something cleaner, something they couldn't spin to their advantage. I waited until they were distracted. Shelley was dancing in the tub to a song blasting from her phone while her sister, Monica, was busy filming the spectacle. I walked casually down the dock, coffee cup in hand, as though I were just enjoying the evening. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. The sisters barely noticed me until I stopped by the outlet. I crouched, set my cup down, and without a word, pulled the plug. The pump went silent. The hum of machinery faded, replaced only by the music and the confused squeals from the tub. "Hey," Monica shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" I stood up slowly and gave them the faintest smile, just saving a little electricity. They exchanged bewildered glances before bursting into laughter. "Oh my God," Shelley cackled. "You're so dramatic. It's just a plug." But I wasn't done. Calmly, deliberately, I stepped toward the straps that held the tub in place. With a simple tug, one loosened, then another. The sisters' laughter faltered. "Stop," Monica shrieked. "You can't do that." "Why not?" I asked evenly. "You seem to think everything here belongs to everyone. Sharing the vibes, right?" The tub wobbled as another strap came loose, the current nudging it gently outward. The sisters were on their feet now, splashing in panic, clutching the edges. Their smug confidence had vanished, replaced by sharp, desperate voices. "You're crazy," Shelley yelled. "We could float away." I crossed my arms. "Maybe you should have thought about that before setting up on someone else's dock." The tub shuddered as the last strap slipped free. For a brief second it hung in place, tethered only by the sisters' frantic hands gripping the dock rails. Then the current tugged harder, and with a squeal of rubber, the hot tub began to drift. "No, no, no, no," Monica cried, scrambling to grab the dock. But it was too late. The gap widened, the distance grew, and suddenly they were adrift, spinning slowly as the water carried them away from shore. Their shrieks echoed across the lake. At first, they tried to laugh it off again, shouting that it wasn't funny, that I'd gone too far. But as the tub drifted farther, their voices shifted to panic. They flailed, screamed for help, demanded I do something. I stood silently on the dock, arms folded, watching as their little kingdom floated helplessly into open water. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the rippling waves. Their shouts grew smaller, fainter, until they were little more than echoes on the breeze. For the first time in days, my dock was quiet again. And for the first time since meeting the Karen sisters, I felt a deep, satisfying calm. The sisters' screams carried across the water long after the hot tub drifted free of my dock. At first, I stayed where I was, leaning against one of the wooden posts, arms folded across my chest. I had expected them to panic, to realize quickly how ridiculous their situation was. But I hadn't expected the sharp satisfaction that settled over me as I watched them spin helplessly. Their once smug faces now twisted in fear. Shelley was the louder of the two, her shrill voice bouncing over the water. "Bring us back. You can't just leave us like this," she shouted, waving her arms wildly. Monica, on the other hand, tried to keep her composure. She grabbed the edge of the tub with both hands, knuckles white, and forced a laugh. "Okay, funny prank. Neighbor, you made your point. Now come on, seriously, reel us in." But I had no rope, no pulley, no desire to play rescuer. I just stood there, calm and unbothered, sipping the last of my coffee as though their panic were a television program I'd chosen to watch. The tub drifted farther, caught in the slow but steady pull of the lake's afternoon current. It spun lazily, turning them in circles, leaving them unable to orient themselves. Every time the tub shifted, their glasses and half-empty champagne bottle clinked dangerously, threatening to spill into the bubbling water. I could see the shift happening in real time, the moment their bravado slipped away, replaced by raw fear. Monica was the first to break. Her forced smile faded, and she began glancing around the lake nervously. "Shelley," she whispered, "we're really moving." "I know," Shelley snapped. "Shut up, I'm thinking." I almost laughed at that. Her tone carried the same entitled authority she used whenever yelling at waiters or barking at neighbors. But now, stripped of her dock, her safety, her illusion of control, it sounded pitiful. They tried everything to fight the drift. Monica dipped her hands into the water, paddling furiously like she could row the massive inflatable structure back. Too sure, all it did was spin the tub faster, sending them in dizzying circles. Shelley, refusing to admit defeat, grabbed one of the flimsy straps and tossed it into the water as if it were an anchor. The strap floated uselessly on the surface. Their shouts grew louder when they realized they were no longer within easy swimming distance. The shoreline, once only a few steps away, now stretched farther and farther, the dock shrinking into the distance. My figure on the dock must have looked like a statue to them, still unmoved, watching. "Call someone," Shelley screamed. "Call the Coast Guard, or whatever." Monica pulled her dripping phone from the tub's ledge, only to curse it's wet. "It won't turn on," she cried, her voice trembling. "The water got into it." Shelley's face twisted in anger. "Useless. You're always useless." Their bickering echoed across the lake, sharp and desperate. I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly their confidence had unraveled just hours earlier. They had been queens of my dock, sipping champagne and mocking my protests. Now they were stranded in an oversized pool toy, powerless against the simplest force of nature. The current carried them farther toward the open water. I could see boats in the distance, tiny silhouettes moving across the horizon, but none were close enough to notice the sisters' flailing arms or hear their panicked cries. Part of me considered ending it, then rowing out in my canoe, tossing them a line, and dragging them back. It would have been the neighborly thing to do, but another part of me, the part that remembered every slammed door, every slide comment, every smiled comment, every smug smirk when they invaded my space, kept me rooted to the dock. They needed this. They needed to feel the weight of their own arrogance. Shelley eventually sat down hard in the tub, splashing water over the sides. She pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, trembling with anger. "This is insane," she muttered. "He can't just leave us out here." Monica, still trying to paddle with her hands, was on the verge of tears. "We're drifting too far. Shelley, what if it tips over? What if we stop it?" Shelley barked. "It's just water. We can swim if we have to. Don't be so dramatic." But her eyes betrayed her. I could see it even from the dock, the flicker of fear, the dawning realization that she wasn't in control anymore. The hot tub rocked with every small wave, unstable and unpredictable. For people who had built their lives on control and entitlement, the helplessness must have been unbearable. Minutes stretched into what must have felt like hours for them. The music finally died when their speakers sputtered and shut off, its battery drained. Without the distraction of noise, their fear became louder, clearer. Every splash sounded bigger, every gust of wind more dangerous. Finally, they noticed a boat cutting across the lake in the distance. Their panic shifted instantly into desperation. They waved their arms frantically, screaming for help. The voices carried faintly, but the boat kept going, too far away to notice them. The sisters collapsed back into the tub, defeated. For the first time since I'd known them, they looked small, not powerful, not smug. Just two frightened women in a ridiculous inflatable hot tub carried by the will of the water. As the sun dipped lower, I finally moved. I walked to the edge of the dock, crouched down, and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Enjoying the vibes," I shouted, echoing their smug words from the day before. Shelley's head snapped up, her face red with fury. "You're evil," she screamed. "Do you hear me? Evil." I didn't answer. I just gave them a slow, deliberate wave and stood again. They shrieked louder, but their voices were hoarse now, cracking with exhaustion. The lake didn't care. It pulled them farther and farther, until their words were no longer clear, just faint echoes against the water. The calm returned to my dock, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it was mine again. The boards were quiet under my feet, the water lapped gently, and the only sound was the rustle of trees in the evening breeze. I knew someone would find them eventually, a passing boat, maybe even a patrol. They wouldn't drown, not in a floating tub like that. But they would remember, they would remember the day their arrogance carried them out to sea. And that thought made me smile. The sun was nearly down when the inevitable happened. A small fishing boat, engine sputtering low, cut across the water near where the sisters had drifted. I was still standing on my dock, arms folded, when I saw them spring to life. They shot up in the tub like prisoners spotting freedom. Their arms flailed wildly. Their screams carried hoarsely across the waves. "Help over here, please." The fisherman slowed, puzzled, before steering toward them. I watched as he pulled closer, leaning over the side of his boat, clearly stunned by the sight of two grown women stranded in a bubbling hot tub in the middle of the lake. The absurdity of it nearly broke my composure. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I didn't need to. The fisherman's body language told me everything. He tilted his head, scratching his cap, no doubt asking the obvious question: "How on earth did you end up out here?" The sisters' arms flailing were talking over each other, their desperation tripping over their entitlement. I imagined their excuses tumbling out. "It wasn't our fault. He did this to us. We were just relaxing." And eventually the fisherman tied a rope to the tub and began towing them slowly toward shore. The sight was so surreal, so deliciously ironic, that I leaned against the dock railing just to savor it. Two women who had strutted onto my property with champagne and sunglasses were now being dragged like castaways, bobbing pitifully behind a rickety fishing boat. As they approached the shore, I caught the fisherman shaking his head. He clearly thought they were ridiculous, maybe even insane. When they finally stumbled onto land, drenched and furious, they made no effort to thank him. Instead, they immediately turned toward me. Shelley's voice cracked as she pointed across the water. You're responsible for this." I stayed silent, just staring back at them. Monica stomped her foot on the muddy bank, her hair plastered to her face. "You could have killed us. Do you even realize that?" The fisherman frowned, clearly catching some of their accusations, and glanced my way. I met his gaze and gave a small shrug. Whatever they said, he didn't look convinced. He muttered something to them, probably a warning to be more careful, then shook his head again before steering his boat back out. The sisters stood there dripping, humiliated. Their inflatable tub sagged on the bank, deflated slightly from the tow water sloshing over its sides. The sight was pitiful, and yet I felt no pity. They shouted more accusations across the water, but I only waved once, a silent dismissal, and turned back into my house. Let them scream, let them rage. Their performance didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they had been seen by a stranger, by someone outside of our neighborhood. Their embarrassment was no longer confined to just me, and I knew that meant it would spread, and I was right. The next morning, whispers began to ripple through the community. I caught fragments at the local cafe, overheard murmurs by the boat ramp. Did you hear about the sisters? Stranded in a hot tub. Can you believe it? Some poor fisherman had to tow them in like lost puppies. By the end of the day, the story had taken on a life of its own. Some said the tub had floated halfway across the lake. Others claimed the sisters had nearly tipped it and drowned. A few even joked that the fishermen considered cutting the rope and leaving them adrift. Every retelling made their humiliation larger, funnier, more unbelievable. The sisters, of course, tried to push back. I saw them marching up and down the street, cornering neighbors, insisting they were victims. He unplugged it. He set us adrift. They whined, their voices thick with outrage. But the more they complained, the less anyone seemed to believe them. The neighborhood knew their reputation. They had burned too many bridges with their selfish antics, too many confrontations at block parties and HOA meetings. So when they cried, foul, people just smirked. One neighbor even muttered, sounds like karma finally came around. By evening, their humiliation was complete. The sisters locked themselves in their rental property, curtains drawn tight, their hot tub still sagging and half deflated, sat abandoned on the shore like the carcass of their failed empire. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. My dock was mine again, my peace restored, and the neighborhood was laughing at them, instead of sympathizing. And yet, as I stood on my porch that night, staring out at the dark water, I realized something. The story wasn't finished. The sisters weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. They would stew in their anger, plot some form of revenge, try to claw back their pride. People like them always did, but I wasn't worried. I had shown them what I was capable of, not anger, not empty threats, but quiet, calculated action. They would think twice before crossing me again, and if they didn't, well, I still had plenty of patience left. The lake was calm again. The moonlight shimmered across its surface, silver and still. My dock creaked softly under the night breeze, but it was mine again, silent, strong, and free of intruders. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the balance had shifted back in my favor. The sisters could stew, they could rant, they could even plot. But deep down, I knew the truth had finally reached them. Entitlement had drifted away, and I was the one who pushed it. The following week felt strange, almost unnaturally quiet. The sisters had retreated into their rental house, the curtains closed, their once loud presence replaced with an uneasy silence. Neighbors whispered about them, some amused, others wary, but the sisters themselves were rarely seen. For me it was blissful. My dock was mine again, the lake peaceful, the mornings free of their music and chatter. Still, I knew better than to assume it was over. People like Shelley and Monica didn't just lick their wounds and move on. Entitled people never did. They craved attention, control, and the last word. Their humiliation on the lake may have silenced them temporarily, but it had also wounded their pride, and I suspected they wouldn't let that wound heal quietly. The first sign came one evening as I returned home from town. A note was taped to my door, scrawled in bold, angry handwriting. You haven't seen the last of us. You'll regret what you did. I read it twice, then chuckled. It wasn't fear I felt, but confirmation. The sisters were exactly who I thought. They were petty, vindictive, and capable of self-reflection. If they wanted to escalate, so be it. I had dealt with worse storms than them. Sure enough, over the next few days, their behavior became erratic. They shouted across the street when they saw me, hurling insults about how I was a danger to the community and a lunatic who nearly killed them. They even tried to call a neighborhood meeting, but few people showed up. Most were still laughing about their hot tub adventure. Their cries for sympathy only deepened the ridicule. By Friday, they attempted one last, desperate move. I was sitting on my porch when I heard the scrape of footsteps on the dock. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. There they were, what was left of their inflatable hot tub back toward the water. The thing sagged like a dead animal, patched with duct tape and clearly beyond repair. What do you think you're doing? I called out. Shelley spun around, her face flushed with anger. We're taking back what's ours, she shouted. You don't own this lake. You don't own fun. We'll do whatever we want. Monica chimed in, her voice trembling with rage. Yeah, you can't control us. We're not afraid of you. I stood and walked slowly down the porch steps, calm but deliberate. You don't get it, do you? I said. My voice even. This isn't about the lake. This isn't about fun. It's about respect. You trespassed, took without asking, and you thought you could laugh your way through it. That's over for a moment. They hesitated. The words hung between us, heavy and final. The wind rustled the trees, the water lapped against the dock, and the silence seemed to remind them of the truth. Shelley's bravado faltered. She looked at the sagging hot tub, at the water, then back at me. Finally she hissed, "This isn't over." But her voice lacked conviction. I stepped closer, pointing to the tub. "Yes, it is. Take that trash off my dock. Leave my property alone. If you try this again, I won't just unplug a tile, call the authorities. And next time it won't be your pride that floats away, it'll be your record. Monica's shoulders slumped, and even Shelley seemed to realize she had lost. With a final glare, they dragged the tub back up the dock, struggling with its weight. Their retreat was slow, heavy with the sting of defeat. That night, for the first time, I felt the story truly end. Not because I had shouted them down, but because I had stood firm without budging. I hadn't stooped to their level, hadn't screamed or raged. I had let their own arrogance undo them, and then I had drawn a line they couldn't cross. The next morning, their rental property was empty. They left without fanfare, their SUV packed to the brim, the deflated hot tub jammed in the back like an embarrassing relic. Neighbors watched from their porches as they sped away, some waving mockingly, others simply relieved. A collective sigh of peace settled over the street. I returned to my dock later that day, sitting on the edge with my feet dangling above the water. The boards creaked softly, but they were clean, unclaimed, mine again. The lake sparkled in the sunlight.calm and endless, a reminder of why I had chosen this place in the first place. I've thought about the sisters and their endless need for attention. People like them thrived on control, on bending the world to their will. But here, on the lake, they had learned a lesson they couldn't ignore. The water had stripped away their arrogance, left them powerless, and turned them into a story the whole neighborhood laughed about. As I sat there, a smile tugged at my lips. Not all victories come from shouting. Some come from patience, from quiet actions, from letting people's own choices expose them. That was what had happened here. I didn't defeat the Karen sisters. They defeated themselves. The lake was still, the dock was mine, and the peace I had fought for had returned, stronger than ever. The story ended not with noise, but with silence. And silence was exactly what I wanted.